Let's talk with our guy, Joe DeLeone, who joins us here every Wednesday on the show. He's a college football and NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports. He's also the host of the Ruffino and Joe Show. Make sure you check that out. You can follow him on Twitter at Joe DeLeone. Joe, what's going on, brother? Happy April Fools. I already got Brad on an April Fools joke. I got Ian Eagle on one, so you better stay on your toes, man.
I'm a little fearful. I will say this: the talk of steak in the break of St. Elmo's with Brad. I'm actually a little distracted already, but I'll try to stay as focused as I can to not be too thinking too much about steak.
All right. Well, look, I know we're going to ask you about Indianapolis this weekend in the Final Four, and maybe you can share some stories of those St. Elmo's steaks. I'm getting hungry just freaking thinking about them. But first, Joe, let's get to what I think the big NFL news here of the last 24 hours or so. What are your thoughts on this whole replacement refs fiasco? I think it's ridiculous that we're potentially heading down the same road as we did in 2012 when it ended in the Hail Mary between the Packers and the Seahawks in week 3. Is that what it's going to take again for the NFL owners to pay these refs what they're worth and invest in their product? Or is there more nuance to the situations? Give us your thoughts on this CBA expiring between the refs and the owners and how the NFL has a contingency plan in place for replacement refs from the lower college ranks and also allowing a Game Day Central command to call penalties from afar in New York City when they see fit.
Well, first of all, with the Central Command, it kind of begs the question why that doesn't have a bigger role in the officiating of games in the first place, but it's probably a separate issue that we could extrapolate on a different date. The one thing that's been actually perplexing with this, I saw some of the demands of what these officials were looking for. The pay that they were asking for was pretty significant, and they were asking for a lot of concessions for not being as accurate and as consistent as they probably should be. I feel like what they're asking to be given in this negotiation seems a bit extreme. I don't know enough about collective bargaining for officials to be able to draw upon if like it is as ridiculous as it sounds on paper, just to look at monetarily what they want to be paid. But I feel like the one simple bit that has never made sense to me with officials, I just don't get why they're not full-time employees. I don't understand why these guys have other jobs during the rest of the year. I feel like that has always been one problem that is easily more resolvable for making officiating better in the sport. And then also having the time and the forward thinking for those guys to look at solutions to make the sport better, to make officiating better. It seems like it's hard to be focused when you've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. This isn't a similar example, but before I started hosting, I was working as a producer. And when I was working full-time as a producer, I was working part-time as a host and hosting a podcast. It was really hard to do the podcast with as much attention to detail as it needed when I was also producing and doing a completely different job. So I think that the fact that they're not full-time employees and then that's not the derived focus of whatever the heck this negotiation is and what they're trying to pull from it, I feel like that's the biggest miss of all of it.
Yeah, pay the people a full-time salary. That's the key takeaway here. Joe, I'm glad you're on the same page with us. Joe, we talked about the Rams earlier on the show tonight. I personally believe when the dust settles on the offseason and September arrives, Sean McVay will trot out the eventual Super Bowl champs. What makes sense for this organization at pick number 13 overall in the NFL draft? What are your feelings on this roster overall? And then going back to draft, do you think they stay there? Or do they maybe trade back? I think that is very much on the table. What are your thoughts on the Rams in general and what they do possibly at number 13 in the NFL draft?
Well, I think that now that they went and got Trent McDuffie, which I've commended that trade multiple times over for the fact that instead of trying to draft a rookie and hoping that guy is going to be ready to go and is going to be playing at his peak performance during the playoffs and hopefully in the Super Bowl, it's risky going and getting a proven starter, paying him using your draft capital, one of your 2 first-round picks, and to be able to retain the other first-round pick. It was a very, very smart move. They're now in a really solid position where they can just go best player available. And I think to your point, when you're sitting there at 13th overall and you're not bought into theoretically Ty Simpson, if they're out on that market, which we don't know for certain, that this pick could be Ty Simpson, but if you're out on that market, do you use that pick to get somebody else to trade up, whether it's the Jets, whether it's the Steelers, whether it's the Browns, to go up and get Ty Simpson? And then do you extract all those extra picks to round out your depth? I think that it's more impactful for them in this draft to be able to have more picks to just have quality depth. That is the path forward for a team like the Rams to reach and win a Super Bowl. We see this all the time. Teams have really good starters, but they lack the depth, and it catches up to them. A really simple example is the 49ers this past year. They kept finding depth out of nowhere, but it got to a certain point where they were on their last legs, and they got boomed, completely dominated by the Seahawks in their last game. So I think trading back, but looking to fill depth in their defensive tackle room, depth at corner, maybe some depth along their offensive line, because it seems like they've got a pretty solid offensive line, depth at receiver. The more picks that they have, I think, is the better for the Rams when there's really not a position of need that I see that they need to attack at pick 13.
Yeah, great answer. Joe, I thought Seattle's signing of Emanuel Wilson from Green Bay was one of the most underrated moves so far this offseason, with Zach Charbonnet recovering from an ACL shredding and Kenneth Walker now in KC. Do you envision Wilson being leaned on heavily early this season? What do they do possibly in the draft? Do they invest in a running back on a related note? And again, back to Wilson, what's his overall upside? Do you feel that maybe he's the new Kenneth Walker in the Seattle offense? So scout Wilson's game for us. And then, tell me if Seattle, you think, is going to invest in a running back in the draft this year.
Well, I think the big thing with bringing in a guy like Emanuel Wilson, with how limited their draft pool is this year, they've got a comically small amount of picks. I think it's like 4 picks off the top of my head. It's insane how few picks that they have to work with, and a number of needs with free agents leaving, especially Kenneth Walker. This at least allows for you to go into the season. If you don't sit anywhere and there's not a running back on the board that you're in love with, you can walk in with Emanuel Wilson and you can get good production out of him. And then hopefully when Charbonnet's back on the field and good to go, he'll probably be your primary running back, or at the very least, he'll shark away goal line touches from Wilson if Wilson ends up playing really well. But I do think that at a certain point, they need to look for that replacement for Kenneth Walker. And I think that the one guy that makes a lot of sense to me is Jadarian Price from Notre Dame. Now, I have not been bought in on taking him at the end of the first round. That's been a little bit too rich for me, but I think that there's a lot of similarities profile-wise to Jadarian Price and Kenneth Walker. Have a lot of juice to be able to pick up some big plays, shifty, good vision, good patience. And I think that Price has the utmost value for the fact that he didn't really have a lot of carries in college, does not have a lot of tread on the tires. You're dealing with issues at running back with availability, and the same thing was already happening with Kenneth Walker before his great playoff run, and then now with Charbonnet. Having somebody who has not dealt with the injury issues and wasn't even the primary back on his primary running back on his team, I think is a really good investment for a team like Seattle.
Talking with Joe DeLeone here on BetMGM tonight, Westwood One Sports. Joe's a college football and NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports. He's the host of the Ruffino and Joe Show. You can find him on Twitter at Joe DeLeone. Again, BetMGM tonight, Westwood One Sports. He's Brad Evans, I'm Pat Boyle. Joe, what do you think of the news regarding the Rooney Rule this past week with the Florida AG, Florida Attorney General, challenging Roger Goodell in the NFL that they need to get rid of the Rooney Rule? Longtime staple of the league that requires teams to interview external black and minority candidates for coaching positions, with the Florida AG saying that it was racial and sexist discrimination, and that the people of Florida don't care what the skin color of their coach is. Roger Goodell said yesterday he's essentially not budging on the Rooney Rule remaining in place. Your thoughts on those comments?
Yeah, I feel that Goodell has the right mentality here, is that you need to still keep opportunities for interviews for minority coaches. I think that at the end of the day, for the hiring trends that we currently see, that we even still have for the vast majority, a lot of white coaches are the ones who hold these positions. You need to keep this rule in place. You need to keep those chances for coaches to get in front of owners in order to be a part of the interview process. I think that the biggest value for this is that guys look across the board for who gets hired. A lot of times these guys are go through multiple years of getting interviewed for such a unique job like an NFL head coach. It requires experience of just going through the interviews. So getting experience through the Rooney Rule, I think, is incredibly valuable. Now, the one thing that has generally perplexed me with this is they're not being not restrictions, but more guidelines for handling the Rooney Rule for situations where teams will bring in guys that they're absolutely not going to hire in order to satisfy the rule. It feels like it's a bit patronizing. I don't know how you work around that. I also do think the inverse of this, when you've got the Patriots who knew that they were going to hire Vrabel, how do you operate in the opposite direction when you know a guy who was unemployed that you were going to turn to? I think that instead of saying that the whole thing needs to be eradicated, it's way too simple. I think that adjustments definitely need to be made. I do feel like for how long it's been in place, the fact that it's basically stayed the same hasn't made a lot of sense to me. But overall, the rule itself needs to stay because of the value that it provides for opportunities for a lot of minority coaches.
Good answer. Great answer. Joe, let's talk about the Final Four. It's in a familiar city for NFL draftniks like yourself in Indianapolis. Talk about your time in the city earlier this year covering the NFL Combine. Did you have the $22 St. Elmo's shrimp cocktail? If you did it clean out your sinuses like a lot of people say it does because of the amount of horseradish that is in the sauce? What are your Final Four picks as well, and who's going to win the national championship? And if you say Illinois, first round of drinks next time I say is on me.
I got to be honest with you, Brad. I have been betting against, I have been picking against Illinois like I did during the college football season too. So I can't
keep
sit
doing
here
it.
and I can't try and patronize you here. I'm not going to do it. But you're right. For as cold as I have been in betting in March Madness, I probably need to keep betting against Illinois and say here that they're going to get knocked off in the first round against UConn. But I will say this. I've had the St. Elmo's sauce. I had it for the first time, the shrimp cocktail sauce 2 years ago. And to everybody's description, it did knock me on my ass. I implore everybody to try it. The one thing that bothered me, though, during the media, the Radio Row stuff that was happening when media availability was happening, someone from St. Elmo's was coming through. They had the shrimp cocktail with the sauce on it already, and they were trying to get the media people to try it, and they were recording videos of us. They tamped down the horseradish in those while they were recording us to like dupe us into thinking that it wasn't as bad as it typically is. So that bothered me. I think that they were trying to pull a fast one. They understand that it's really going to clear your sinuses, as you've talked about here. But to talk about the games, though, I am afraid to pick against Dan Hurley. I was at Rhode Island playing football when Dan Hurley was there. I've seen that dude walk through the hallways with his head down and his headphones in. He is a intense dude. And I think that would prove to us last weekend against Duke that it would be silly at any point in any game to count out UConn with the track record that he has in these moments. So as much as you probably want Illinois to win, I feel like UConn can just end up sneaking past us. At the end of the day, though, this game obviously, or this national title game, is going to come down to Michigan and Arizona. Nobody is shocked by that. The one thing that I keep latching on to is just how much Michigan has eviscerated everybody in front of them. And it feels like they have really been galvanized by losing the Big Ten championship. And I think that was a true sobering moment for them. It made them realize, hey, we're really good, but we can't take things for granted. And they took Purdue for granted. And I think that now they're going to be locked in, be able to knock off Arizona. Whoever wins that game will win the national championship.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Talking to Joe DeLeone here for another 2 minutes or so on BetMGM tonight. Joe, what's the biggest draft development here over the last week or so that you've heard? I feel like, for me, Reuben Bain is getting the Will Campbell treatment, where now his draft stock might be dropping because of his shortly measured arms. Ultimately, Will Campbell went 4th overall and had a pretty damn solid season, until the playoffs. But comment on Reuben Bain's short arms if you'd like. But is there any other news or rumors you're hearing recently that you feel like could result in a big surge or a big drop for a player 3 weeks from now?
Yeah, the one guy that I'm paying the closest attention to is Jermod McCoy, who he was an enigma during this entire process to the furthest degree. Didn't play a snap this entire season, tore his ACL last January during workouts. So everybody, the whole entire season, you keep hearing McCoy might come back. Draft analysts like myself were excited because he had so much potential that he showed in 2024. He was one of my highest graded players just overall. I gave him a blue chip grade. He was up there with Jeremiah Love and Caleb Downs as a premier prospect. And he never played. We never got to see him. We never got to see just a little bit of a glimpse of him. for whatever reason, and there was no clarity. He shows up at the combine. We're standing there at his podium. We're trying to hear from him. News comes out right before that he's not participating at the NFL combine. People are trying to ask him, why aren't you participating? And he's being unclear. And now everybody's starting to wonder, what are you hiding? What is wrong with your knee recovery? Well, he shows up at the pro day, and I think generally a lot of us in the media were thinking, is he actually going to participate, or is this going to be a rug pull at the very last second? Not only does he participate, but he tests off the charts, and he looks good and fluid and fine during the on-field drills. I think that the biggest bit here, there's not going to be a Will Johnson type of a situation for Jermon McCoy. I think that Jermon McCoy calmed those concerns, and I think that there's a real conversation to be had on him being the first cornerback selected and off the board this year over Mansour DeLeone. He is phenomenal, and he could end up being, I don't want to classify him as a steal, but he could end up being the one player that goes somewhere in the teens that we end up being shocked is a consistent all-pro and is in one of the best corners in the league in the next 2 or 3 years.
Ooh, okay. Very good. Hey, Joe, appreciate your time as always, brother. Enjoy the Final Four this weekend. Hopefully, your picks go well. And then next week, man, we'll be 2 weeks out of the NFL draft. Things are going to start heating up real quick. We can't wait to be chatting with you, brother, who's been grinding away on the tape 365, 24/7. So enjoy it, man. We'll talk to you next week.
Of course, guys. Thanks for having me.
Fade, Illinois. See you, Joe.
There you go. Joe DeLeone. He's going to be a hot commodity this month. He's a college football and NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports.